Hi, everybody. Good morning. And I am so excited that you are all here. Welcome to the first ever LGS Research Meeting of the Minds. And I have been thinking about a meeting like this for many, many years. And I am so excited that you are here joining more than 250 people from around the world for this is exciting, a very exciting meeting. So I have been living and working in the LGS world now for about 26 years. And there's never been a meeting where we've talked about disease-modifying therapies. And it's really exciting time that all of you guys have come together to help. I want to just start with a few thank yous, and I'm going to give a brief introduction of how things are going to work, and then we'll jump right in and start listening to the exciting talks that we have planned. First off, I want to say thank you to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Let's see if I can't advance my slides here. This meeting would not be possible without CZI. For the last 2 years, we have been working with them as part of the Rare as One program because we received a capacity grant as part of this group of 30 organizations. And they've been helping us to understand what it means to create patient-driven research networks. They've been funding us to grow our capacity, and this meeting truly would not be possible without them and without all the members of the Rare as One network who've really come together to help us shine and be the best that we can be. So thank you so much to them. They are not alone in supporting this exciting meeting. We've had 7 of our industry partners supporting this exciting meeting and all of the things that are coming out after this, including a Meeting of the Mind seminar series. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. We would not be here without you guys. So there is a Zoom room where all of the scientists are sitting right now, but we have a whole group of people who are watching from home. And they entered through our conference lobby, which looks like this, and came into the ballroom and can now see this Zoom meeting, which has about 50 people in it, or will have about 50 people in it, who are our scientists and our discussion leaders, our thought leaders, our clinicians, who will be talking and having this discussion about disease-modifying therapy, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But the way that this works is that in the Zoom room, if you are a scientist or a researcher, or you're in the discussion room, the speakers will be speaking, and you, during the Q&A times and during the panel discussion at the end of each session, you can raise your hand, and you can then, if you're called on by the moderator, ask your question of the speaker, or ask your question of the panel. For those of you at home, you can also ask questions by typing them into the chat over there on the right side of the screen. And you can, then those will be fed over to me and my team who are in the Zoom room. And we have a whole group of volunteers that are helping us with this. So if you want to ask questions from home, or if you want to chat with each other, you can do that at home as well. So what is the purpose of this meeting? The biggest purpose, the biggest reason we're doing this is to bring everybody together. LGS is a big problem, and it's going to require big solutions to solve it. And it's going to take all of us. We are all in this together. So we're bringing together patient families, scientists, clinicians. Many of our advocacy partners are here because LGS impacts their communities too. Many of our industry partners are here. The federal government has representatives here. And so we just wanted to thank you guys all for being here. We're also here to talk about how we might get to a disease-modifying therapy, and I'll define that for the purposes of this meeting in a few minutes. But one of the biggest outcomes we hope to come from this meeting is that it will help us to guide our grant strategy at the LGS Foundation. And we will plan to put out an RFA after this that will help to drive this work forward. We really want to look at disease-modifying therapies. So we could have had this Meeting of the Minds on best treatments, right? Improving clinical care. Why didn't we do that? And before I answer that, let me just go a little bit into our journey, the journey that my family's been on for the last 20 plus years. This is my daughter, Savannah. She was born 28 years ago, healthy, and was typically developing until about the age of 2 when she had her first seizure. The seizures were not called seizures, they were called spells or episodes. We found out later that the doctor didn't want to label her with such a horrible diagnosis as epilepsy. At age 3, we found out by reading her medical record that she actually did have epilepsy. It was idiopathic. And we didn't really know what idiopathic meant at the time. We later learned that it was a presumed genetic epilepsy. And I'm sort of glad the idiopathic, symptomatic, and cryptogenic terminology has gone away, because I'm not sure I understand them even today. So we found out she had epilepsy at age 3, and that's really when the seizures started to come with a vengeance. Initially at age 2, she just had a couple. In hindsight, they were tonic-clonic seizures. We didn't even know that she was having seizures. We thought she was choking on the first one, and then we just didn't know what spells or episodes were. She quickly developed more than one seizure type. At one point, her EEG picked up 6 different seizure types, in addition to going into nonstop seizures and having generalized slowing. It wasn't until the age of 5 that she was actually diagnosed with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And back then, the diagnosis was, more than one seizure type, moderate to severe cognitive impairment, and then slow spike and wave on the EEG. And the definition of LGS has changed over time. And we didn't get that diagnosis till she was 5. When we did get the diagnosis, we thought that it had been missed up until that point. We didn't realize that LGS was not something that she started out with. It's something that she developed later from whatever the cause of her seizures was, and then her seizures, and then that evolved into LGS. And it did that because she was having seizures at such a young age. We didn't know that back then. We just thought she had been misdiagnosed up to that point. This is really when the seizures just came with a full vengeance, hundreds of seizures a day, too many to count for most of our days. A good day was 5 to 10 seizures, but those were few and far between. And really what we knew about LGS back then was that it was an umbrella syndrome name that could be caused by a bunch of different things, and it had these specific EEG features. And the science has really been coming along in the last 20 plus years, but it's moving more slowly than we'd hope. Really, over the next 16 years, Savannah would try and fail more than 26 different therapies. We call it the LGS treatment loop, and that's literally what it is. There's more than 40 different therapies that are out there on the market today for seizures, and some of those are specifically for seizures associated with LGS. She was not a candidate for resective brain surgery. We have done some of the palliative surgeries. We've not done corpus callosotomy, but we've considered it. And I think that speaks to the state of what it's like living with LGS, because many of our families do get palliative brain surgery. There's no promise that our children will stop seizing, but it might reduce the seizures. And I think that that's just a devastating statement in and of itself. She had more than 40,000 seizures across those 16 years, from the age of 2 to the age of 18. And then miraculously at the age of 18, about the time the technology came out for whole exome sequencing, we found a series of genetic mutations in Savannah in calcium channel genes. And we put her on a calcium channel blocker based on the evidence and reviewing the evidence and talking with her doctor. And that really made a huge impact in her life. And so for the last almost 11 years, from the time she was 18 to now age 28, Savannah's been on this calcium channel blocker and been doing much better. She's had a 95% reduction in her total number of seizures. She's had nearly 100% reduction in the amount of time she goes into nonstop seizures, also called status epilepticus. And she's doing much better. She's still the mental age of a 3 to 7-year-old, depending on her skill set. Very intellectually disabled from the brain damage from LGS, but we did find some relief, even though we thought we never would. And this isn't just Savannah. This is actually true, broadly in the LGS space. Since I've been working for the LGS Foundation for the last 5 years, we've done a number of interactions with our community. We held a patient-focused drug development meeting where a number of our families got up and testified and poured out their hearts and soul to the FDA and to other people who were listening to talk about what it's like to live with LGS. We did a patient and caregiver concern survey. We were in our support groups all the time. And really what's come out of that is that there's this hierarchy of needs in the LGS community. I think it's really important to point this out. Many of you guys will remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is here on the left where, if your physiological needs down at the bottom of the pyramid or your safety needs or your love and belonging needs aren't met, you're not going to reach the top of the pyramid where you're living your best life. For LGS, the bottom of our pyramid is really is death and mortality. We have a lot of death in our community, and there are many times that my daughter has almost passed away, and so we're dealing with that as a real feature of our lives every single day. Above that is crisis. Our families, our children are constantly in crisis. They're having seizures, they're going into status epilepticus, they're getting injured, they're getting life-threatening infections. And then above that, we spend all of our time trying to keep them out of crisis. Just the basic life skills: eating, sleeping, taking their medicines, going to the bathroom, drinking, being safe. And then they don't do any of that themselves. So whatever's above the pyramid, above, those avoiding crisis, basic life skills, doing it for themselves, we don't know, because we are living in crisis mode and keep these kids alive mode all the time. And it's not just children. These children do live to become adults, like my daughter has. They're still mentally very young, but physically they're adults. And so this hierarchy of needs really represents what our life was like growing, when Savannah was growing up, and it still can be like that, but also where most of our families are today. So the reason that we're having this meeting and why we chose to focus it on disease-modifying therapies is because LGS families need help. Even if you get to the best doctors in the world, if you have the best care, if you have unlimited resources, so you can get anything that you want, if you get your loved one in as early as possible when you start to notice a problem, there is no systematic way to help those with LGS. There's more than 40 different treatments out there that we can try, but we don't know which one to try. And none of them seem to be making a huge difference in the large percentage of patients. We've been treating LGS the same way for 20 or more years, where we basically throw everything at it and we hope for the best. And we want to change that. And we think we can do that by maybe looking into disease-modifying therapies. We hope we can do that by pivoting the way that we design therapies to actually treating the underlying pathological disease processes. So for the purposes of this meeting, disease-modifying therapy, we're going to define that as a therapy, a treatment. It could be a drug, a diet, a device, or anything of those, surgery that delays, slows, reverses, or prevents the underlying pathological or the pathophysiological disease processes. And this has to be accompanied by an improvement in how the patient feels, functions, or survives. So that's the definition we're going to use for the discussion in this meeting. And that's important because compared to what we have now, we have therapies that treat symptoms. The symptom might be seizures. Many of our kids aren't only on anti-seizure meds, they're also on medicines for sleep, medicine for GI issues, medicine for behavioral issues, and on and on and on. And these all treat the symptoms within LGS, but they usually don't work. And more than 90% of those with LGS will go on to have seizures into adulthood. We know they're not working. And more than 95% will be intellectually disabled on the pretty profound and significant spectrum. So we think that by looking into disease-modifying therapies and setting science in that direction was the first step that we needed to take. We're definitely going to be having discussions at future Meeting of the Minds around what is the best treatment and how can we improve care. But first, we want to be looking for therapies that actually target the underlying mechanisms of LGS. For the purposes of this meeting, we'll use the current ILAE, International League Against Epilepsy definition of LGS. Kids who have LGS and adults have more than one seizure type. Their age of onset is in very young childhood. There was a really nice study by Amberg that shows that most that develop LGS start seizing in the first year of life. There are very specific abnormal EEG characteristics that speak to the pathophysiology, that speak to the underlying disease. These are slow spike and wave and generalized paroxysmal fast activity, or GPFA. And then an intellectual disability, which might not be present at the time of diagnosis, but is pretty much present in everybody within 5 years of seizure onset. So that's the definition we'll use, and you'll be hearing more about this in the first session. But we want to be focusing on LGS. So prior to my daughter getting the diagnosis of LGS at the age 5, and prior to many people getting the LGS diagnosis, they have pre-LGS. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more on the next slide as well. But pre-LGS is, you can have your etiology or cause. It can be genetic, it can be acquired, and then that would lead to seizures. And the seizures then are now, if you have multiple seizures, now you have epilepsy, right? And then that evolves into LGS. And so we want to focus today's discussion, and we're definitely going to cover pre-LGS in the future. We want to focus today's discussion on LGS. LGS means that you have these abnormal brainwaves, that you have more than one seizure type, that you have onset in childhood. And so LGS is really an age-related manifestation of all of these different causes. It has to happen, in childhood, and then this leads to the formation of abnormal network. We're definitely going to cover pre-LGS in the future for our meeting of the minds, but we wanted to focus this one on people who actually have LGS. And the biggest reason for that is because of the LGS Foundation. We serve those who currently have LGS, but we certainly want to be thinking about prevention in the future and are going to start doing that very soon. So LGS is an epileptic encephalopathy where you have your cause, there's so many of them, and then early life seizures in nearly everybody. And then you have these abnormal brainwaves, and then that leads to even further developmental slowing and regression beyond what you would expect just from the cause of the neurological disorder alone. So to think about it this way is LGS is over here. If you have time at the bottom, LGS evolves over time. Here's our community over here, all the way on the right of the screen. They have LGS now. They have more than one seizure type. They have these EEG features. They have cognitive impairment. They have seizure onset. It's super refractory epilepsy and a horrible prognosis. It doesn't really matter how they ended up with LGS. The prognosis is horrible. Many will continue to have seizures into adulthood. Many will have cognitive impairment. There's a really high risk of death. And this abnormal brain network problem is not rare. There's about 50,000 people in the US and more than 1 million worldwide that are believed to have LGS. And so LGS is this disorder of the network, and we do have possible biomarkers in these EEGs. I mean, they're definitely used for diagnostic criteria, but if we can maybe understand the EEGs in LGS, everybody knows the EEG, the slow spiking wave, and the GPFA are bad. Can we reverse them? Can we target them with treatments? And maybe that's our into a disease-modifying therapy to this disorder of the network. How can we stabilize the network? How can we prevent it from getting worse? How can we reverse it possibly one day? Those are the questions that we're beginning to think about. And then pre-LGS really comes before that. And again, I think it's very important for us to distinguish. We are very interested in pre-LGS, but for today, or for the next 2 days, we hope to come out with information about gaps in research that will help us to write a request for applications or request for grant applications that will target those with LGS, whereas subsequent grant RFAs will actually be looking at pre-LGS. So, but the pre-LGS, so if over here on the right is LGS, the pre-LGS is everything that comes before it. Before that, before my daughter had LGS, she had treatment-resistant epilepsy. And there are other syndromes that can be present, like West or early infantile epileptic encephalopathy. Before that, she had epilepsy, which is essentially 2 or more seizures. Before that, she had her first seizure. And before that, she had her etiology over here on the left, right? And so from these studies by Berg and another paper and Goldsmith here, we know that about 33% of LGS cases are from injury, mostly hypoxic ischemia. There are also congenital malformations. About 15% are from genetic causes. There can also be infectious causes, metabolic, immune causes, all of these etiologies that then progress to seizures, to epilepsy, to treatment-resistant epilepsy. And then some of them, not all of them, develop LGS. And why is that? And so I think we want to focus in on these questions. Each of these dotted lines down the center of this represents an intervention point. And so I think that we have a lot of work ahead of us as we think about how can we intervene when you already have LGS? How can we intervene if you're trying to prevent somebody? I've heard Dr. Kelly Knupp say, the kids look like they're going LGS. What does that mean? can we quantify that and can we prevent it? So even though we're going to be talking a lot about LGS and treating those who have it now with some sort of a disease-modifying therapy, we definitely want to be moving in the future to look at this whole spectrum. The other thing I just wanted to say is that families want to help. Not only do we need help, but we want to help. The Institute of Medicine says that it can take 17 years for scientific findings to get to patients. And I know that we sequenced my daughter's exome 11 years ago, and it's still very, very difficult for those with LGS to get genetic testing, even though that technology has been out for a while. We want to help bridge that gap. We want to help move it faster. And we're going to be talking a lot at this meeting, and this is for the families that are out there listening. This is going to be a really high-level scientific meeting. We've got some of the best people in the world who are studying these phenomena, this concept of LGS, this concept of network diseases, this concepts of disease-modifying therapies. And you might be thinking to yourself, I don't belong here, but just stay with me for a few more minutes because you do. We are all in this together. We are going to be talking a lot at this meeting about basic science research, which is really what happens mostly in animal models. That's really tomorrow. We're going to be talking a lot about clinical trials and preclinical development, so developing treatments that would move into patients. We're going to be talking a bit today about evidence-based medicine research. So what is it that doctors use to treat and to think about how they treat patients with LGS? And we're going to cover all of this today. And it's so important that we have all of the people who work in this area with us. But it's also important that we have patients and families with us. And the reason is because LGS is so much more than just the research work that's being done. It's so much more than what we see in the hospital, what we do in the lab, and what we do in participating clinical trials. And I like to think about LGS as sort of a subway or a train map. If you think about the Washington, D.C. or pick your favorite city subway map, right? Each of these lines, represents a train that we experience as patient and families as we're going through our LGS journey. And you've got the red line, which is the research line, and the blue line, which is the seizures and safety line. We've got the diagnosis and treatment, LGS-associated disorders, which is everything from sleep to behavior to constipation to you name it, physical disabilities, tube feeding, things along those lines. We've got school and community, and I couldn't even fit all the trains that we really have to deal with and all the stops on these trains. But the research component, even though it's the huge part of this meeting, it's just a couple of stops on our journeys as patients and families. And so as you design therapies, as you move forward as researchers, we want to be there to help save you time and to help save you money so that when you design, it takes all these other things into account as well. Because we know that if you design a clinical trial or if you design a therapy, it can affect everything in our lives and not just just the thing that you're trying to work on. So I think that we're all in this together, and LGS patients and families, we are the experts on living with LGS. We're the experts on what it's like. We're the experts on what the journey has been and what the journey is now. And if we can take that information and use it to really help scientists and researchers and clinicians and our industry partners and our advocacy partners and government and everybody who is part of this broad stakeholder community, we can move things forward faster. And we can all go further faster. It's one of my favorite sayings is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And LGS is a really big problem, and we have very far to go. So we all want to do it together. And with that, I just want to say finally that we are going to keep the conversation going. We've got a couple things coming up. We've got our Family Science Day coming up from the Meeting of the Minds on September 18th. We've got a Research Revolution webinar coming up. We've got our research award, our grants will open. And so we'll be talking about all of this more tomorrow.